Hi, Mark Augustus here. Today Dave will be taking you on a tour around St Mary's Church in Burton Latimer, and I'll be following him around with a camera.
My name's Dave, and I'm going to be your guide this evening on a tour through time. We have a time-traveling machine today where we're going to go from 1147. It's been a church here since before that time. However, the main structure we're going to see today started its life during the Norman period, the early English period, and you'll see lots and lots of additions all the way up to 2019. Now, where we want to start our journey is Burton Latimer has always been full of agents of change that don't always follow the status quo. But if you guys want to cast your eyes just up over the top of the door there, another bit on my pop quiz. Anyone know how old that statue is? Anyone has a guess when that statue may have made its debut? Recently.
1929.
1921, so you're very close.
Quite close.
So this statue was the money was raised by the children of Burton Latimer to install that statue in 1921. The reason it's a font. So it's a font from about the 13th century, and it was found in a back garden here in Burton Latimer. It was a decoration. But it's believed that this may have been the original, or certainly the second font that this church has had. And again, these doors, many of you may have stepped through it as we've welcomed new babies into the world, or indeed any services, maybe saying goodbye to our loved ones or a wedding. But these doors are a testament of love. If you guys have a look here, it's very difficult to read it now, but basically it's for the Mr. and Mrs. who were the rectors at the time in the 16th century. And so I'd like to welcome you into the church, folks. Please come this way. There were a lot of orphans and there were a lot of widows. And so the Poor Law was enacted, where it was the responsibility of the church to raise funds and distribute it to those that didn't have anything.
This dates back to 1601.
And it's one of the very few. You can count on two hands how many still remain across the country. And yet we have one here in our own little town. Speaking of other uniquities in our town, for those of you who've been with us before, if you cast your eyes to the paintings, So St. Catherine, you can see the original paintings. These were hidden under the limestone, or under the limescale, until the Victorian age. So they had been very heavily damaged, but they date back to the 13th century. And they tell the story, and it actually starts in the corner there, chronologically, and moves this way. But they tell the story of St. Catherine. Now, St. Catherine was an interesting character. St. Catherine was of a time where she believed that the poor and the ill should be helped. And what was happening at the time of St. Catherine was that wasn't the case in the kingdom where she was. And she managed to get to the leader's wife and convince him of Jesus and the story of Jesus and his teachings. And she converted to Christianity along with some of her soldiers. Well, of course, the king was not very happy with that, and he ordered her executed and put her to the wheel. And a miracle happened where the wheel apparently exploded and it killed everybody in the room except for Catherine. And for those of you that like bonfire night and you like a Catherine wheel that spins around, that's where it gets its name from, is St. Catherine and her wheel. Ever heard of the Green Man? He is a green man. And the Green Man, of course, was seen as a pagan deity of nature, or so we think. We actually don't know. And he was at his most popular not in the medieval age, but during the Victorian age, where they used to be very romantic about all these things and mix and match time periods. So our Green Man may well be Victorian, because we had a lot of expansions in the Victorian age, and it might be a little folly, or it could be original. It would be really interesting to find out for sure. But just one of the mysteries we have in this building. Now again, we talked about the paintings earlier and the cult of St. Catherine, and it's highly likely that there was an altar specifically here for that cult. So what would happen is the pilgrims would come in, they would say their prayers, they'd give an offering, and then they would observe the paintings. And it's highly likely that the paintings actually stretched all the way across the walls. The ones that are, however, are very, very highly valued in English history and in art history as well as theological history. Now the windows that we have here, again, I think is another part of our social and economic history in Burton Latimer. Burton Latimer had a bit of a renaissance when the railway came, between the quarry, the shoemaking industry, the clothing making industry. And I think we see lots of elements of wealth in this church because of that. The windows are a testament to that. They are Victorian. They're the rector's families that made the designs. But they are absolutely beautiful. They're done in a Renaissance style, but very much in that Victorian popular way of delivering them. But they are absolutely beautiful. This one, of course, shows Jesus having his feet washed and being prepared there. And you've got the feast over on the left-hand side. You've got baptism preparation on the right-hand side. There's a lot of fabulous things in this church, and I've got to be honest, in my experience, my favourite part when I came in that caught my eye was this beautiful screen. This is 15th century, and it was restored in the Victorian age. But the rood screen, of course, was a way of trying to divide the most holy part of the church with the nave and the rest of the congregation. But the Victorians did open it up a little bit. And indeed, like I say, rather than a crucifix, which would have been what would have been on there, instead we have a Latin cross at the top of the rood screen. Right, if you guys would like to come on through with me, please. Some of you may have known William Edward Pitt, who was rector here in the 70s and the early 80s, is that he was a descendant of both Pitt the Younger and Pitt the Elder, Prime Minister of England. And next up is this magnificent Victorian pipe. It's been restored twice since its installation. The first time we restored it, when it was it was just before World War I, they took all the pipes down and laid them on the pews and bent them all, and they all went out of tune, and they had to retune it. When the National Lottery grant was brought in to then restore it only a couple of decades ago, they'd learned that lesson because there were very, very thorough records. As well as the learning elsewhere, but they didn't make that mistake again. The family that made this altar are the same ones that did all the wood panelling in the Houses of Commons and House of Lords. So isn't that fascinating to know that we've got such magnificent craftsmanship here. Again, very Victorian in its design, but absolutely beautiful woodwork. One of the more modern features you'll see over here, 1960s design, but still a much important part of the history of this church. And here's where we keep the sacraments. So sacramental wine and bread. In theory. Actually, they're not kept there anymore, they're kept around the corner. But they used to be kept there. But that's what it was installed for. But this used to be the Bank of Burton Latimer. It was. It was also the legal repository. Because this chest, dating back from 1629, you'll notice has two large locks. And two different people would hold the keys to those locks, and it would be used to deposit the valuables of the town. And what is really fascinating is when this was opened in 1992, there were complete records of Burton Latimer's history, land holdings, marriages, births, deaths, etc., that went all the way from 1629 to 1992. The only exception being during the English Civil War. If you wish to see any of the documents that were in there, they're now in Northamptonshire's County Record Office. I'd like to cast your eyes up to the paintings up on the walls here, near the arches. People that came into these churches couldn't read, and what happened was these paintings are 16th century paintings. And what they do is they tell the story of the prophets of the Old Testament. So it's a link to early Judaism teachings and Abrahamic religions. They are beautiful paintings. Again, they're very rare in their form. It is likely we may have had more paintings, but this was what could be salvaged. And if you guys look really, really closely at the paintings, you'll see they bulge out a little bit. And that's because they were actually removed off the wall using special cloths and chemicals. Whole villages went off to war in World War I. And Burton Latimer, albeit a town because of the market charter, was no exception. And that's where our Remembrance Corner came from. Now, one of the young men that lost his life in World War I was the son of the rector here in Burton Latimer at the time. And that's why we have this cross here. So Lieutenant Jacques was the son of the rector. Now these crosses, you don't see many of those anymore either. The other thing that not a lot of people are aware of is this standard here. And there's a little plaque on the side there. We hold the standard from World War II for Operation Market Garden. So Operation Market Garden was strategically essential for the war effort. What had happened is Operation Overlord had liberated the north of Normandy, and the big push was taking place to try and get across the Rhine and into Berlin to end World War II. And speaking of blessings and people of importance, in this is our memorial book for everyone who's lost their lives. So every day we turn the page and we can see who lost their life on that day. If anyone ever wants to come and have a look, you're very, very welcome. And Anne here, who's the reader here at the church, she keeps very extensive records, not only here, but also who's buried in the churchyard. All the arches are very different in their design. And as we go out, you'll see a lovely crazy pattern on this round one, which is in early English style. And then we have the Gothic style at the front there. And then we have a much more simplistic set of arches here. And this is the oldest part of the church. So this dates back to the 12th century. Like I say, there was likely a church here as far back as the 8th century, but this is the oldest bit of the church. And here we have testament again about how wonderfully gracious the people of Burton Latimer are now. So we have a new servery that was indoctrinated only a couple of months ago. This font dates back to the 13th century originally. And then it was modified in the 15th. It was much further back, up until only a few decades ago where it was moved forward. The ringers used to be in the bottom, and then thanks to the Harper family, they were able to move them up to the top there, so we have a little creche area for the children now.
The bell tower was first built round about the 13th century.
100 years later or so, the spire was added to the top. The bells themselves range from a number of different dates and refurbished around about World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Loyd-Hearn, but I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you all for watching.